and was by no means any kind of technical expert.
And yet, in 1958, Bill Kaysing was promoted to the position of service engineer. Desperate to downplay Kaysing's credibility, propagandists have insisted that service engineer is a very unscientific job. Jay Winderly in particular was quoted as saying,
"It is much like calling a janitor a sanitation engineer."
We contacted Rocketdyne, currently owned by Pratt & Whitney, to establish what kind of job a service engineer plays. Our message was answered by Communications Director Brian Kidder. "Thank you for your interest in Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne. In answer to your question, I can only offer a generic answer to how a service engineer was defined during the time period in question. A service engineer would have provided technical support for actions like equipment processing, transportation, installation, checkout, and for the launch itself. This would have been either when the product was in the field, ready for use, or during analysis prior to delivery to the customer." Clearly, the job of a service engineer was to provide technical support and evaluate all the products, in this case rocket engines, that Rocketdyne built. This was by all means a scientific job. But, point it out all you want to the propagandists, they will deny it tooth and nail in their downright psychotic and indescribably irrational diatribe against Bill Kaysing. As you have seen, this video by Astrobrand is one pointless and equally unfounded cheap shot after another, after another, after another. Most have told me that this video is not even worth commenting on, let alone making a video about. So why am I bothering? Well, this video does contain the staple of Astrobrand's agenda against Bill Kaysing and conspiracy theorists in general. The quote mine of all quote mines.
So, how did this hoax theory get started? Did he uncover some top-secret documents or overhear a conversation between some of the big wheels?
Yes, he did. I'm sure Astrobrand knows this statement exists. It comes before the quote that he mines in this video.
Weren't there actual events, though, that happened to NASA that made them realize they couldn't send somebody to the moon? Like, when did NASA realize that it was impossible for them to send somebody to the moon and they were going to have to fake the moon landing? At what point did they realize this?
Well, initially they realized it in 1959 when I was privy to a study made by the Russians. The Russians discovered that the radiation on the moon would require astronauts to be clothed in 4 feet of lead to avoid being killed.
As far as overhearing stuff from the big wheels, Kaysing made no secret of the fact that during his career at Rocketdyne, he was in on a clandestine operation called Apollo Simulation Project. According to Kaysing, NASA and the Defense Intelligence Agency assembled this group together in 1961 for the sole purpose of simulating flights to the moon and purporting them to be the real thing. Astrobrand tells us neither of this and instead chooses to flog something else.
It might be interesting to see just how the whole thing got started. And remember that nearly everything people claim, even to this day, originated with this man. Here is a clip from a telephone interview with Kaysing, which can be found in a 6-part series on YouTube.
What motivated me to spill the beans was a young man from Vietnam Wars by the name of John Grant, and he said that he was sent to Vietnam to kill people with no good reason. He also got a heroin habit, and he says, "Bill," he says, "what I want you to do is to blow the whistle on this rotten, corrupt government." He says, "Why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon?" So I attribute my interest in this project to John Grant.
After hearing that, I don't know how anyone could take anything that this man said seriously. Kaysing's inspiration came from some Vietnam vet who apparently hated the United States government as much as Kaysing did. It wasn't a matter of a moon hoax. It had to do with his hatred for the United States, and that was a consequence of his paranoid psychosis. In case you missed what he said, which absolutely demolishes his credibility and discredits any other statement he might have to make about Apollo. Let's hear it again.
He says, why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon? So I attribute my interest in this project to John Grant. And he says, why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon?
Astro Brandt has repeatedly used this quote in many of his subsequent videos.
He said that he was sent to Vietnam to kill people with no good reason. He also got a heroin habit. And he says, Bill, he says, what I want you to do is to blow the whistle on this rotten, corrupt government. He says, why don't you say something outrageous like we never went to the moon? So I attribute my interest in
Part A,
to John Grant.
Astro Brandt conveniently neglects to reveal the portion that came just before this.
So you're working at the rocket place, working for the space program. You eventually leave the space program. At that point, did you know that the moon landings were going to be faked? Because you said in 1959, the United States of America realized they couldn't put a man on the moon, so they'd start faking stuff. Why didn't you spill the beans right then?
Well, I don't know. What motivated me to spill the beans was a young man from Vietnam Wars by the name of John Grant, and he said that he was sent
Clearly,
to Vietnam.
Casing kept this knowledge of Apollo bottled up inside, and subsequently didn't even watch the moon landings when they aired. During the summer of 1969, I was living in a small house on the beach in Santa Barbara, California. A fanfare of newspaper stories heralded the launch of the astronauts to the moon. Soon, I knew, TV screens would flicker with barely discernible pictures of moonwalkers. But, despite a 7-year stint at Rocketdyne, the firm that built the main propulsion units for Apollo, I could not work up the least bit of interest in the entire astrophysical circus. Not even to the extent of reading an article or watching the most exciting moments on the boob tube. Why, I wondered. Why, of all people, shouldn't I be captivated with the prospect of seeing the fruition of my work and the labours of thousands of others who had contributed to the Apollo voyage programs? Why, indeed? I decided that I did not believe that Armstrong, Collins and Aldrin, or anyone else, was going to the moon, and consequently, I could not generate the least enthusiasm for watching a phony performance. After seeing the way Grant was treated, Casing was finally pushed to coming out of the closet regarding his view on Apollo. Grant had proposed that Casing do a satirical project. Casing even states that in his book. Instead, Casing ultimately decided to do a serious project, especially as during his research he came to learn of Thomas Ronald Barron and his missing report. So there you have it. There was never any paranoia or psychotics or whatever foible that Astro Brandt may want to pin on his opponents. It is nothing more than Astro Brandt's parroting his severely limited knowledge of their work. I brought this up to Astro Brandt's attention, yet he continues to peddle his baseless and extremely defamatory accusations.